Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Doug Peters. I am co-counsel for Mr. Hemi Neuman. Seated at my table next to me is my co-counsel and my law partner. His name is Bob Rubin. At the end of the table, the young lady seated there is Miss Mary Darnell. She is our paralegal. Seated next to her is our client, Mr. Hemi Neuman. May it please the court,
You may.
Mr. James, Mr. Gary. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about two good men. Rusty Sneiderman, 36 years old, from a good family. Bright, well-educated, a graduate of Harvard, a hard worker, and a great father to two precious children, Sophia, 4 years old, and Ian, 2 years old. Hemi Neuman, 48 years old, from a good family, but from a troubled family. Bright, well-educated, a graduate of Georgia Tech with honors, a hard worker, and a great father to three precious children. The oldest two are twins, 21 years old, a boy and a girl, Tom and Lee. Currently both in their senior year at Georgia Tech, following in their dad's footsteps. And his youngest daughter, 3 years younger, 18 years old, also following in her dad's footsteps, Addie, who is in her freshman year at Georgia Tech. On November the 18th, 2010, Hemi Neuman shot and killed Rusty Sneiderman. And on that day, the lives of those two men, the lives of their families, their hopes, their dreams, and their futures were shattered in broken pieces on the ground that could never be put back together again. Why? Why? Why is it that this could have ever possibly have happened? That's the question in this case that you, the jury, that we, myself, Mr. Rubin, Ms. Darnell, that everyone in this courtroom, everyone in this community is searching for the answer. Hemi has cooperated. He has met with, he has answered every question that could be asked of him from 3 forensic, psychological, psychiatric experts. And he's told each one of them. And he has admitted that he planned this for several months. he has admitted that he purchased this gun. He has admitted that he hid it by wearing a disguise. He has admitted that after doing this, he hid the disguise. He threw the gun away. He has admitted that he was not truthful when he was questioned by the police, that he hid it from them. But of course, these three doctors, in receiving that information, still ask why? Because none of that makes any sense. These three doctors have conducted what's called a forensic evaluation. That just means they're specialists in doing an evaluation under the law and explaining to you what it means. Their job is to ask whether or not Hemi, no one else, not you, not me, but whether or not Hemi believed that he was right or he was wrong in what he did in this case. And when they asked Hemi that, this is what Hemi said. When I shot Rusty and I killed him, it was to protect Ian and Sophia. I believe that Ian and Sophia are my children, and I want to raise them. I want to raise them so they are not exposed to, and so they don't experience what I experienced and what my sister experienced when they were their ages. Andrea tells me she will never, ever divorce Rusty. But I love Andrea. And I believe that Andrea loves me. And with with Rusty gone, we can be married. And we can be together forever. And I hid this because if Andrea knew, then she and I and Sophia and Ian would never, ever be able to be together. So these three doctors on the surface began with reviewing Hemi's life. His character is impeccable. There's never any indication that in 20 years of marriage there was ever infidelity in his life. He's never done anything dishonest. He's never been arrested. He's never even held a gun in his hand in his life. His character has been one of 20 years of working to provide for, to nourish, and to love his children. And that is what he has done for 20 years, to give them what he never had. So, of course, the doctors look deeper. The first thing they ask, has there been problems in your family with mental illness? And perhaps the quickest and most significant thing, they are informed that Hemi's aunt, Linda, the sister of his mother, is mentally ill, diagnosed with a lifetime of struggles with bipolar. But the doctors will tell you that the answer of why in this case It actually begins with Hemi's father, Mark Neuman. He's not here. He's almost 90. He's confined to a nursing home. But in April of 1944, Mark Neuman was the oldest of 7 children who were accompanied by his mother and father and by both sets of grandparents, where all 13 members of their family were captured, loaded onto train cars, and hauled to Auschwitz. Hemi's daddy was released 13 months later. In those 13 months, 11 members of his family were marched into the gas chamber and executed. The only 2 to escape was Mark Neuman and his next oldest brother, Sam. He never recovered from that. He's been described, understandably, as an emotional wasteland. He withdrew and he sank into darkness. And for almost 20 years, he tried to have a life. He said he would never marry. He would never have children because he did not want to bring children into the world as he knew it. And he went from Italy to Israel to Colombia, South America, to the United States, to Mexico. And when he was almost 40, he met Hemi's mother. She is here in court on the second row, the third from the end. When he met her, she just recently turned 19 years old. She had a baby at 16, Hemi's older half-brother, and they married. She was a baby herself. And soon after that, Hemi was born, and then his younger sister, 3 years his younger, Monique, was born. Monique will testify in this case, and she will describe for you what it was like when she was young, when she was the ages that Sophia and that Ian are in this case. It was a life of anger. It was a life filled with terror. It was a life of uncertainty. It was a life of not knowing when or why that their father would explode in rage. His wife, at her tender age herself, dealt with that by leaving and by being gone and staying away. And therefore, Hemi and Monique were left to try to raise themselves under the circumstances that I've just described to you. Hemi was then, and as he sits there right now, he may be one of the brightest people in this courtroom. His younger sister was not blessed with that. They didn't know probably at the time, but now we understand. She had difficulty learning, probably dyslexia, probably some type of learning disability. She had to repeat the first grade 3 times and the second grade 2 times. And Hemi was aware of her challenges. And Hemi felt responsible for his younger sister. And Hemi tried to be a buffer between what I have described to you that existed in the mind of his father and his younger sister. There was violence towards the children. It may have been by hand. It may have been by a belt, by a picture frame, or whatever could be grabbed. She will explain to you an occasion when she sat in a room with her father watching TV. Hemi was probably 5, 6, and he walked into the room carrying a bowl of ice cream. And out of nowhere, apparently because he walked in the path of his father erupted, struck him on the back of the head. He went all the way across the room. The bowl shattered, the ice cream went everywhere, and it absolutely petrified Hemi and his sister. She will tell you that to this day, she can still feel and taste vegetable soup going up her nose, where her father became enraged one day because she would not eat, pulled her hair back, and forced her to eat it. She will tell you a memory of driving down the road when she said a bad word. I think she said it was bitch. And her dad in the front seat said, "Where did you learn that?" And she said, "Hemi told me," as little sisters will do. And at that point, her father pulled on the side of the road, pulled Hemi out on the shoulder of the road, and beat him until he could not stand. Monique's life has been pretty much a tragedy. As an adult, she's dealt with these issues. She has become addicted. She has been arrested for cocaine. She will tell you about the impact that it has had on her life. The district attorney told you that when Hemi was 13, he went to a boarding school. That's correct. Let me tell you how that happened. Hemi's daddy said, "Pack everything you've got." And Hemi did as he was told, and he put him in a red vinyl suitcase. And at 13, his father put him on a plane by himself and gave him one piece of paper. And on that piece of paper was their telephone number written and the name of a boarding school. The name of it was Hadassah. But the boarding school was in another country. And at 13 years old, Hemi was sent to Israel by himself, unattended. He landed there close to midnight. There was no one there to meet him. He did not speak the language. He was able to find a ride that gave him a ride to this boarding house that he only had written down. He arrived there about 1:30 in the morning, and to this day, Hemi says, the man that came out looked like a guard, and he looked to me like the hunchback of Notre Dame. I have never felt more abandoned and frightened in my entire life. Hemi immediately became ill. And he was ill for weeks. At that boarding house, there were certain Jewish holidays where everyone from the school would go home. On the first of those, Hemi was sick in the infirmary, and so the nurse took him home with her. It became known in the school that unlike all the other students, he had no family. His father did not come to even visit him for over a year. And you should also know that when he was put on the plane, his mother was never even told this was being done. And there's no contact with his mother. So friends at the school started inviting him to come to their homes over these breaks. But Hemi, to this day, says, I still remember seeing the pity in their eyes. And I determined that I was not going to be pitied, and I was not going to be put in that condition. So the next time there was this holiday, I told them I was going to stay at the school. He has explained to the doctors that one of the things he enjoyed at the school was they had a dairy farm. And on the dairy farm there was an outbuilding that they called a shack. And that's where Hemi stayed that winter over those holidays by himself. They gave him a blanket, they gave him a cot. He was cold, he was alone. Workers at the school who knew he was there said they would bring back food and leave it outside of the kitchen, which he picked up, and he said he felt like a dog or a cat. And he still remembers to this day saying, what have I done to be put in this position? He will tell you that's the first time in the depression and the darkness that he felt the presence of what seemed like a demon. He was able eventually to graduate from that school, and he went to Georgia Tech, 1980 through 1984. The doctors will tell you the next significant thing is that during the fall semester of 1981, Hemi could not get out of bed. He did not go to class. He did not want to go out to eat. He did not want to socialize. He simply felt he could not get out of bed. He reported this to the doctors. Now, I've told you he graduated from Georgia Tech with honors. I went to Georgia. I know if you go to Georgia Tech and you graduate with honors, that's something pretty special. So I wondered about that, and the doctors wondered. We obtained his transcript. And in 4 years and 8 semesters, he made the dean's list every single quarter except that semester. He said that he finally got out of bed to take his exams. He took them and he passed. And that semester, he got a 2.68. We have the transcript for you. After he graduated and he got a little bit of experience, basically in 1987, he moved to Israel and got a great engineering job there. And roughly for the next 20 years of his life, until 2006, when he made his last move here to Atlanta, he worked in Israel. And about 1990 there, he met his wife, Relly. And they started their family right after that with Tom and Lee and Addie. And that's what he's done for the last 20 years until these circumstances that you're hearing about surrounding GE and Andrea during 2010. That's all he did, was work and love and take care of these children. The doctors will tell you there's 2 other things that are significant in this. There was a period in 1998, very, very different from the way he felt in that shack, from the way that he felt as a sophomore. In 1998, he remembers feeling like he was on top of the world. He was like hyper personality. He was like animated, almost kind of euphoric. At that time, he had a great job in Israel. They had a beautiful home. The kids were doing great. And he came home one day and he told Relly, sell the house. We're going to move to Florida. She said, why? What is there? He said, we're going to move to Florida. And in 1998, he left that job. They went to Boca Raton, Florida. He bought a big house. He put his 3 children in private school, and he didn't have a job. And for months he didn't have a job. And during that year, the $120,000 they had cleared in the equity of their home was basically spent and gone. To this day, when the doctors ask Hemi, "Why did you do that?" He says, "I don't know." He returns to Israel, and he's hired by GE then. In Israel, in their department there. In 2006, I told you that he moved here with GE in Atlanta. He's director of operations at GE, and that's a pretty big deal. And it's quite a position. And only few people with his talent and credentials could do that. Now, it's important to understand this. When they went house hunting in 2006, his wife fell in love with a house that was more than they could afford. There's nothing wrong with that. That happens in life. But they bought a house with a huge mortgage that they shouldn't have. And truthfully, they were living beyond their means, and their debt was growing. And so in 2008, this feeling that I described to you before, this going fast, mind racing, this kind of hyperactivity, I'm on top of the world. Hemi says, I will cash in my pension that I had from all those years in Israel, and I'll use it because our current debts, our total debts are about $80,000. And he did that. But when he got the $100,000, it was just about the time that Tom and Lee were graduating from high school. And truthfully, that's what Hemi's life was about, was his children and his family. So they started doing graduation trips that they really could not afford. And they did 1, they did 2, they did 3. One was to Puerto Rico. Relly, his wife, had told him that she never really liked the engagement ring that he had given her. So in Puerto Rico, on a trip he really couldn't afford to go on, he spent $8,000 and bought her another engagement ring. He came back, and they had a few trees in their backyard that they were afraid with these Georgia ice storms could be a danger to their house. He brought in people to take them down. That was about $3,000. But he said, no, let's just redo the backyard. And they spent $35,000 redoing their backyard. And so, with all of this activity, this mind racing, this I'm on top of the world, suddenly, all the pension, all the savings were gone. That's what he went through in 2008. That's what the doctors will tell you. It's important that you understand that. So let's go now to 2010. And I want to take you back to February of 2010. And I first want to tell you about Hemi at that month of that year. Hemi's financial problems had mounted. What he had done that was not the right thing to do, there's no good answer for it, but he found himself at a point where his home was going to be foreclosed on and he was going to have to file bankruptcy. For a man in his position, that was devastating. At that time, he started to become depressed. There was a meeting in January of 2010, and he had gotten short with some of the workers. And so when his yearly review was done, for the first time in his entire career, it was negative. And his boss told him that he really could not support Hemi in Hemi's wish to continue higher in the company. In addition to that, the stress, the marital problems had taken their toll, and Hemi and Relly, after 20 years, were having severe marital problems. They had talked about trying to keep positive, trying to make things work, and they actually decided between the two of them that when he came home from work every day, before they would sit down to try to work things out, they would simply embrace each other just for a moment. Hemi explained to the doctors the final straw for him when he came home one day and really crossed her arms and said she did not want to hug him. He explains after that, remembering a trip driving to Greenville where again he felt the presence of the demon, the depression. And he told the doctors for the first time in his life, he thought in February of 2010 of committing suicide. But he said he thought about Tom, he thought about Lee, and he thought about Addie, and he couldn't do it. Let me tell you about Andrea. In 2010, in February. Andrea is quite shrewd. She had been staying at home with her two children, working as a project manager for Harvard University in their development of their online courses. This gave her the flexibility to give Rusty her ideas about what he should do for a living. In February of 2010, she was involved in literally everything, every aspect of the business, every venture that he tried. She was always knowledgeable and in the fold. It's important for you to understand that the last, I think, 5 years leading up to February of 2010 had been difficult for Andrea and for Rusty. 5 years before that, together they had tried to start a website business with a man named Paul Sims on a GoDaddy website. They tried for months and it failed. They needed money. Rusty then took a job at her urging with J.P. Morgan. He worked there for about a year and he was terminated. At that point, Andrea and Rusty tried an insurance website business, and together they worked on that for months, and that did not work. They needed money, they needed benefits, and Rusty at that point went to work for Discovery Point, which was a daycare franchise. Nothing to do with the daycare in this case, but that was the kind of business it was. Rusty worked there for a little over a year, and he was terminated. Rusty, at that point in time, worked with Andrea, where they had tried to get a Motorola resale company started to buy a company, but they didn't have enough money for that. They were becoming desperate financially because Rusty, not because he was not a hard worker, not because he was not smart and bright, but he simply had not been able to maintain steady employment. So in February of 2010, that is why Andrea started looking for a job herself. When she returned to work to GE, everything in hers and Rusty's life became switched from how it had been. She was now working, she was now traveling, and Rusty was the stay-at-home. And it was up to him to take Sophia and to take Ian to daycare, to preschool. It was up to him to try to get supper started at night. It was up to him to spend that time in the family, and it just caused severe problems. Andrea talked about those problems to many people, including Hemi. The doctors asked, and Hemi explained to them what happened between he and Andrea. April the 12th was her first day at GE. She worked for him as the director of operations. She was one of his, I guess you'd say, like lieutenants. She's smart. She was very smart. The week of May the 24th, they began a trip to Melbourne, Florida. And they started personal conversations. Hemi will tell you, you call it whatever you want, he fell for Andrea. If you want to call it infatuation, if you want to call it love, he fell for her, and they began their personal conversations. The next month, in June, the week of the 21st, they take another trip, just the two of them, to Norfolk, Virginia. They have an intimate dinner, they share a bottle of wine, and for the first time, Hemi explained to the doctors that there was something that he felt with Andrea that caused him to open up and talk about what he had experienced as a child like he had never talked about it in his life. And he explained that to her. And in response, Andrea discusses with him the problems, the difficulties that she is experiencing with Rusty at home. On July the 13th and the 14th, Hemi and Andrea take another business trip, and they go to Lake Tahoe, Nevada. They have an intimate dinner. Hemi says they shared a bottle of wine. Hemi said he read a poem to her that he wrote. He said they expressed feelings for each other. He told her then he loved her. She told him she would never, ever leave or divorce her husband, Rusty. But then she told Hemi that she was attracted to him. She told Hemi that she fantasized about him. They went out, they sat by Lake Tahoe, they looked at the lake, they looked at the stars, and that's where they had their first kiss. Their next trip together was in Longmont, Colorado, July the 21st through the 23rd. Now, I need to explain to you how this happened. This was a week when Andrea was going for a course, an education that GE put on in Colorado. Hemi was not scheduled to go. But on that weekend, before this week, Hemi and Relly were at a friend's house, and Hemi was sitting in their living room, and he said that he, for the first time in his life, felt it seemed a presence that he described as an angel. And Hemi says the angel told him that Sophia and Ian were his children. And secondly, that he needed to go and to tell Andrea that. Hemi becomes animated. He becomes hyperactive. He leaves there and immediately gets on the phone to the Hampton Inn in Longmont, Colorado, and starts calling almost every employee there that will get on the phone with him telling them that he's married to Andrea. She is his wife. And he's going to be coming out to see her, but he wants her to be surprised when she checks in. And would you please send her flowers? Would you please send her chocolates to her room? These people thought he was a nut. I hope the state will bring them in here to testify to that. Of course, they didn't do it. But during that week, Hemi flies out. They meet. They go to dinner. Hemi can't wait to tell her the news. She discusses her marital difficulties again. And Hemi tells her that she could search the world over and she would never find a better father for Sophia and Ian than him. When he told her that, she looked at him like he was out of his mind. And she said, I told you, I am married to Rusty. It is irrelevant, and that will never change. At that point, Hemi was embarrassed to tell her that he had felt the presence of an angel, and he never told her that. But he continued to tell her the father that he could be for the children. After that dinner, she led him in her room and they shared her motel room. They shared her bed together, July 21st through the 23rd. Now, 3 weeks after this, after he has said that to her, after they have had these intimate dinners, after he has said, I love you, after he says, I want to be the father of your children, 3 weeks later, she arranges for him to meet Rusty. And Hemi and Rusty meet, and they have lunch. And Hemi comes to their home 3 weeks after she slept with Hemi. On August the 26th, they go out of town on their next trip together. Again, it's just the two of them. This is to Greenville, South Carolina. They have adjoining rooms. They have intimate relations. Specifically, they had another intimate dinner. When I say intimate dinner, that might mean different things to different people. Hemi says they literally would share food off one another's plate. They shared wine. They're going back to their room. And they decide they want to have a bottle of wine and watch a movie in their room. And the two of them on Thursday night start looking all over Greenville, South Carolina to find a bottle of wine, which apparently was one of the most difficult things to do in Greenville, South Carolina. It was like two kids on a date. They came back to the rooms. They both put their pajamas on. They were in adjoining rooms. She joined Hemi on his bed. He opened up his computer and they watched The Goodbye Girl. They drank that wine together. Hemi took her back to her room and kissed her goodnight and went back to his room. After that, Hemi believes that he went back over and they had intimate relations. But he told the doctors, I'm pretty sure that I did. But so much has happened now, it's hard for me to know for sure. On August the 27th, it actually lasted 3 days. After doing this with Hemi, then Andrea expresses guilt over what she has done. And she rejects Hemi. She pushes him away. On September the 18th through the 25th, they go on their next trip. This is to England. They're gone for a week and they have intimate relations there. It's a very important point that I do not want to forget that happened right here on August the 19th. Then meeting Rusty and going to his home, Hemi said that when he left her home and was driving back, just as he was about to get on 285, he felt the presence of this angel again. And at that point, the angel told him, right after he had met Rusty for this first time, that Rusty was going to harm the children. That he needed to protect the children. That he needed to kill Rusty. And from that point, on August the 19th until November the 18th, for 3 months, Hemi planned to do what he did in this case, because that's what he was, he says, instructed to do by the angel. When they return from England, they have one final trip together. This is their second trip to Greenville, South Carolina. It's on October the 21st. They have an intimate dinner together. They're dancing. They go back, they have intimate relations again. And then after that, Andrea again backs up and says she's feeling guilty. She rejects Hemi now for the second time. But then, even after that, on November the 16th, 2 days before Rusty was shot, she invites him back into her home after she's been going on 1, 2, 3 trips, sleeping with him, having intimate relations with him, where he has continually expressed wanting to be the father of her children. She brings him into their home on November the 16th. Now, this is quite a dadgum story, okay? And the doctors, Dr. Flores, Dr. Marks, Dr. Crawford said, this is what happened? So these doctors, when they do a forensic evaluation, they are not limited to just what someone says. They are allowed to go to the evidence and to look and to evaluate what someone says as it's compared with what the facts in the case are. Let's start with phone records. This is quite an involved relationship that Hemi has described. Some of you have notepads, and there's going to be about 8,000 pages of records that the district attorney and we have agreed will be available to you. So I'd like to ask you to write down page 707 to page 810. This will just take a second, just these numbers. 707 to 810 and 1366 to 1436. Because at the end of this case, whether it's 2, 3, or 4 weeks from now, you'll have those pages with you and you can look at them. And they're going to tell you this. 707 to 810 and 1366 through 1436. This is what the phone records show. During April, there were 4 calls total between the two. During May, there were 5. During June, there were 7. During July, when these trips to Lake Tahoe and to Colorado take place, between the two of them, there were 65 phone calls back and forth. For a total of almost 5.5 hours, they talked to each other on the phone. In August, there were 27 phone calls back and forth where they talked for 4 hours. In September, there were 43 phone calls between Hemi and Andrea where they talked for almost 2 hours. In October, there were 51 where they talked for 5.5 hours. And in November, leading right up to November 18th, as of that point, there were 35 for 2 hours on the phone. That's just the phone calls. The text messages between the two of them. July, 152. August, 262. September, 372. October, 358. November was cut short, 92. That shows the intensity of their relationship. I explained to you that on August the 26th, Hemi told them they went to Greenville and they had adjoining rooms. This page number you should look at, 4845. On that page of the evidence in this case, you will see email transmissions back and forth. Not phone calls, but emails. From Hemi. Let's drive to Greenville Monday, August 2nd, because that's when the trip was to take place, but it got continued for business reasons. Andrea responds, great idea. Hemi says, call them directly and ask for the GE rate. Reserve a room for me as well, and ask them if they can be close to each other. Andrea's response, done. Her making the reservations that put them in adjoining rooms. I've told you in this case that Hemi continued to tell Andrea about his interest in her children. I've told you what he expressed to her when he met with her in Colorado. I'll give you 3 more page numbers. 3867 and 3810 through 3812. After they have returned from Colorado, on August the 16th, Andrea sends a photo of she and Sophia to Hemi. Hemi responds, I just saw your text messages. I am so happy for you and Sophia. You can't imagine. Thank you for sharing with me. I feel like I was there, standing by the doorway, looking adoringly, with a huge, proud smile on my face. It made my week, Hemi. That's just before they go to Greenville. After they come back from Greenville, on September the 8th, 2010, Andrea sends an album of 98 pictures of her and the kids. You're invited to view my photos in case you're interested. Hemi responds, thank you. You're invited to view my photos. Later that day, she sends him an additional 100 pictures of she and the kids. Hemi responds, you and the kids are amazing. Thanks for sharing that with me. I told you that after they had the intimate relations on August the 26th, that on August the 27th, Andrea expresses guilt, and that she then pushes Hemi away. Let me give you 4 more page numbers of evidence. 4949, 4953, 4956, 3841, and 3842. On those pages, I'm reading to you the emails exchanged between Hemi and Andrea following their relations that they had on August the 26th. Hemi, the next day, August 27th. I'm sorry I caused you so much pain when all I wanted was to give you so much. I know it doesn't help, but I am so sorry. I shouldn't have come over. You are so beautiful, such a great person, Andrea says. I really do not know what to say at this point. Your apology is heartfelt, but does not make the ongoing pain go away that I now have to repent and live with for the rest of my life. Not sure what I was thinking. I am not sure how to live with this. Andrea says, I will just harbor feelings of anger and regret for an unknown period of time. Hemi emails her. This is one of the last ones for me. I know it won't help, but please never forget how much I love you. Andrea responds, I know, but so do other people. and I have betrayed them all. And I am not sure how to deal with that now. Hemi writes back, one last thought. Besides the birth of Tom and Lee, this was the most beautiful, most wonderful experience of my life. Andrea responds, I appreciate that you at least understand what I am feeling, but I am having constant feelings of anger towards you, me, everything. Yes, it is mixed with some other feelings as well, but those are selfish feelings that I am trying to suppress at every moment. I guess one of the worst things is that Thursday night was one of the best dinners out I have had in a very long time. It was such a great evening as a whole, and now I do feel sad that I will never have that again. So many other things to say, none are appropriate for email, and most result in me getting very angry. Hemi responds, marry me. You're thinking I'm crazy, and you've made your intentions clear. But before you respond, just spend a night thinking about it. It won't solve everything, but you know I will give you, Sophia, and Ian the world, and that together we can make it all work. Marry me, Hemi. Those pages will show you one final statement from Hemi to Andrea via the email. The betrayal and anger is not about what we did. That's a cop-out. It's about how you felt and what you wanted. How you felt when we looked at the stars in Tahoe. When we woke up Friday morning in Denver, Colorado. When we walked out of the restaurant on Thursday. When you took my hand and nestled your head on my shoulder. Blaming it all on Friday morning doesn't cut it. I know how to make you and Sophia happy, even though I have never met her. I now know more than any time ever that it is you that I want to share everything with, and you are pained because it is also what you want, but think you can't have. Think about it. Be with me forever. Hemi. I'm going to give you 5 more numbers, and I ask you to bear with me. 4436, 4437, 5107, 4306, and 5219. These will show you the arrangements that were being made for the trip that Andrea and Hemi took to England. Before the trip, Andrea sends this email to Hemi. This is on September the 12th. 6 days before they leave. I know you are in charge of Friday, but really a random question. Does it sound nuts for me to ask you if you want to go to the theater on Friday night? I am not even sure we could make it there in time. Plus, it's a fortune. I am sure that it is a lot for me to ask. I even considered paying for both of our tickets, but not sure I can swing that right now either. Anyway, it was just a random thought, not a requirement at all. There are plenty of other great things in London. Hemi responds, I was planning a surprise for Friday. Since the cat is out of the bag, I wanted to go to a dance club. We can figure it out next week. I love your random thoughts. She responds, what a fantastic idea. Yes, we can figure it out. I have always wanted to go to a club in London. And then Andrea sends this email to Hemi. On September the 14th, 4 days before they travel together to England, she says this, desire versus reality. As you know, is a world I am trying to ignore because I have to. So sorry, not fair to you, I know. I have other thoughts, but not the time right now. Just want to read 2 more emails to you that were exchanged right after they returned from the trip to England. Andrea emails Hemi on September the 27th. So many arguments over the weekend I could tell you about, but it will only make it worse. The kids did very well while I was gone. So did Rusty. But now that I am home, the tension is bad. I guess that is the real issue. Hemi then responds to her, and the evidence in the case will show that the night before, he had met with a coworker, and he was telling them about his involvement, and he was excited about this love in his life. Her name is Orna Hannison. Hemi says to Andrea, "It was a great evening with Orna. As for the personal issue, she was shocked, of course, but very understanding. She suggested that I do counseling first without ending it completely and irrevocably. If for no other reason to prove to myself and the kids that I tried everything, I'll call the doctor tomorrow and set up an appointment for myself, and then we'll see where that goes." Andrea responds to that with a smiley face and says, "There is not much else to say than that. All good news." These are the things noted by the doctors in the case when Hemi was interviewed, telling them the truth about what happened. There's a witness named Christy Olivera, Olivera. You may want to write her name down. I told you about their trip on October 21st, their second Greenville trip. And I told you there was dancing and dinner and wine and intimate relations. Christy Olivera, I expect the state will bring her in to testify, was a waitress at the restaurant that night. And she will describe Hemi and Andrea because they were the only two in the restaurant. It wasn't late at night. They were dancing. Hemi was spinning her around. Hemi was groping her. Hemi was handling her. She was laughing and giggling. They were kissing on the mouth. They were, she says, lovey-dovey, and she was responding to it all. She described, before they left, Andrea went to the bathroom. And she talked about that Andrea seemed like she was sort of upset about something as she and Hemi were talking. She said that Hemi came up to her, this Christy Olivera, and she describes him as being excited, with personality, and was just animated. Does that sound like the evidence that you've heard in this case? And Hemi said to her, "This is great. She," meaning Andrea, "is dealing with a jerk in her life." And said when she came out of the bathroom, she reached up to Hemi and she kissed him on the mouth. And they left the restaurant arm in arm. I expect you'll hear from another witness named Melanie White. You might want to write her name down. She is a real estate agent. She was the one that met Hemi and Relly in 2006 when they bought a house that they really couldn't afford. And she was their friend. So I told you Hemi was trying to hold off foreclosure. So he called Melanie White during this summer. And he started calling her repeatedly and explaining to her about his love that he had for Andrea. And Melanie White was right on, and I expect she will testify. She told him over and over, she's a married woman, she has children, she will not leave her husband, you're being led on, leave her alone, go back to your family, go back to counseling. Melanie White is a ray of common sense in all of this, and told Hemi that over and over. But she said that Hemi was like a puppy in love. Hemi said that he felt that he and Andrea were like soul mates, that they gelled. Hemi said to her that he and Andrea could finish each other's thoughts. Melanie White said that what she saw was that Hemi was played back and forth like a yo-yo by Andrea. I expect that Andrea will admit statements that she made to some of her girlfriends. I've told you what the evidence shows was happening. She has a girlfriend named Andrea Littman, and just after the Colorado trip, after spending the time in the room, sharing the bed, after that, Andrea Littman and Andrea have a conversation. Andrea says, my boss is trying to hit on me, but I'm not letting that go anywhere. Andrea says, has there been anything going on? Have you slept with him? Andrea says, no, I would never do that to Rusty. She has another friend named Shayna Citron. And just before the Europe trip that I've described to England, just before that, Andrea is talking to Shane and says, I've told him that I'm married, I'm not interested, and that was pretty much the end of the conversation. Shayna says, Andrea, was anything going on between you guys? Andrea says, no. Even to her mother. Even Andrea to her mother. When the police are first questioning Andrea the day after the shooting, and when Hemi's name finally comes up in that conversation, her mother says that Andrea told her, I made it very clear to him that I wasn't interested in him and nothing would ever happen. That's the representation that Andrea made to her own mother. Just going to finish with 2 or 3 specific things, but they are all so important. You heard the district attorney tell you about the week before Rusty was shot. And it was Hemi that was laying beside their house with a gun. It was him. I think it's important for you to know, until Hemi cooperated with these 3 doctors and told them that was him, that was unsolved. The investigation by the DeKalb investigator's office, the Dunwoody police, no one knew who that was. It was Hemi that told the truth to the doctors. That was me, that I was there. 4 page numbers, 801, 802, 1430, and 1431. Rusty called 911 at 8:36 a.m. when he discovered who was actually Hemi by the bed. The phone records for that day show that at 7:25 a.m., Andrea called Hemi 2 times. 2 times, 1 hour before. Hemi ran away. He did. And 35 minutes following that call, Hemi starts calling Andrea. That day, they exchanged 15 text messages between them. Would you please write these 2 numbers down? 805 and 1434. These are the phone records that surround the time when Rusty was shot on November the 18th. These phone records between Andrea and Hemi show that the night before, on November the 17th, they exchanged 3 calls. The last of them was at 7:38 p.m. and it was 18 minutes when they talked to each other on the phone. The next day, Rusty's body was first discovered and the police were called at 9:16 a.m. outside the Dunwoody daycare. At 9:27, 11 minutes after that, Andrea starts calling Hemi. And in the first hour, while she is on the way to the hospital, in the first hour, discovering that Hemi has been shot, she calls that Rusty has been shot. She calls Hemi 6 times. The text messages that day show the same thing. Text messages the night before and text messages continue throughout that day. Andrea was questioned by the police on 3 occasions. The first one was when she and her family were interviewed by the police at their dining room table at their home the next day. It is so important for you to understand that the evidence in this case is that while the police were coming to her home, she had discussions with 2 of her friends, Shayna Citron and Andrea Lippman. 2 of her friends that she had told her story, that her husband, that Hemi had tried to make advances to her, but she never responded. In both of those conversations, they both said, the first thing you need to tell the police about is your boss, is Hemi. And Andrea said, I know. But when she is interviewed on November the 19th, she doesn't tell them about Hemi. And the truth is, it is 1 hour and 16 minutes that she is questioned. And it's then the police that ask her this question. Has there been anybody within the past year that has expressed an interest in you and in trying to break up the family? She does say, yes, my boss Hemi. And she says, he hasn't done anything to break up my family. He has just expressed feelings for me. That's all that she said. She's questioned 5 days later on November the 24th. She's questioned for over 3 hours with not one mention of Hemi. And when that does come up, she says, Hemi went on business trips with me. I'm not hiding anything. I don't think this Hemi thing is anything, but that's up to you guys to figure out. And finally, on January the 5th, this is the day after Hemi was arrested on January the 4th, the investigators bring her back in, and the investigator says, you need to tell the entire, unadulterated truth. And her response is, he had feelings for me. I was never, ever going to be unfaithful to my husband. Following her interview on November the 19th in the presence of her family, when everybody went to bed that night, she stayed up. She put 2 calls into Hemi at 10 minutes till 12 and 8 minutes till 12, and had 2 conversations with Hemi that night, each lasting 3 or 4 minutes. Page 4098. Just bear with me. 4098. On that page, you'll see what I suggest to you are almost unbelievable emails. The evidence in this case is that on December the 30th, Andrea has a phone conversation with her girlfriend, Tammy Parker. And Andrea tells her, I think I know who did this. I think it was Hemi. She says, I need to tell the police. That was the agreement. That's on December 30th. The evidence in the case is that it wasn't until January the 4th, 6 days later, 6 days of her saying this was Hemi, 6 days before she went to the police on Wednesday, I'm sorry, I'm not sure of the date, on January the 4th at 1:30 in the afternoon. This page of the evidence that I told you is an email that Andrea sent to Hemi the night before. She says, Hemi, I am thinking about stopping by the office tomorrow for 30 minutes or so. Do you have 10 minutes to chat in your office? Signed, Andrea. Hemi responds, I'm not feeling so good tonight. I will not be in the office tomorrow. Andrea responds, I am only able to come in once, so let me know when you are back. She tells her friend Hemi did this. She waits 6 days to go to the police, and before she goes, she wants to go and talk to Hemi. When they arrested Hemi, the district attorney told you that they took his iPad. And you'll have those pages from his iPad with you. Page 3251, 3254, 3255, 56, and 57. These show you the entries from Hemi's iPad regarding his family's birthdays. Here's his mom and dad. Here's his wife, Relly. Hemi's sister, Monique. The twins, Tom and Lee. Hemi's daughter, Addie. And his daddy, Poppy. And among those phone numbers of only his family members, he has Andrea, Sophia, and Ian. I only have 2 final pages for you.
In that case, ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening about an hour and 15 minutes. I'm going to give you a brief stretch break. As I told you during jury selection, I will give you reasonable breaks. What I'm going to do is give you a break at this point in time. Deputy Moore is going to let you go into the jury room. Deputy Moore is going to be about 10 minutes. All right. All right, lawyers and parties, you may be seated. You may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. The last 2 page numbers are 5153 and 5154. Part of the evidence in this case, which will show you that in December of '04, there was a life insurance policy taken out on the life of Rusty Sneiderman with Andrea Sneiderman's spouse as the direct beneficiary. And in June of 2008, another $1 million life insurance policy taken out listing Andrea Sneiderman, wife of Rusty, who was insured as the direct beneficiary. And those pages will also show you that on December the 14th of 2010, approximately 3 weeks after this, that all of those proceeds were paid to Andrea Sneiderman. The last thing I want to address with you is the doctors in the case. The evidence will show you that within the first few weeks of mine and Mr. Rubin's representation of this case, we asked for help to understand why this could have ever possibly happened. And we first turned to a Dr. Julie Rand, She's actually married now, so she goes by Dr. Julie Rand Dorsey. It's a two-name ending, Dr. Julie Rand. She will tell you that we turned to her as a trusted member of this community, as a consultant, not to do an evaluation of Hemi for his mental state during all these things that went on, but to try to help us understand what we should do as lawyers, because we're not doctors. We turn to her because she will tell you she is a board-certified psychiatrist. She is also a board-certified forensic psychiatrist, which is another level. She is also a professor at Emory School of Medicine. And for 12 years, from 1996 through 2008, she was the head psychiatrist at Georgia Regional Hospital here in Atlanta. And she was in charge of doing evaluations in cases exactly like this. And she is the expert that the district attorneys and the judges turn to for her opinion. Since she was only doing a preliminary screen to try to understand what we might have, she asked a psychologist, his name is Dr. Peter Thomas, to assist her. We did not. To determine preliminarily what should be done in this case by Mr. Rubin and myself. She turned to Dr. Thomas because he is a licensed psychologist. He's former president of the Georgia Psychological Association, and he is a professor at Georgia State University. They did not do an evaluation to tell you whether or not, in their opinion, Hemi is not guilty by reason of insanity. They only came in to try to help us understand this. They both said Hemi has emotional, he has psychological problems. They recommended that we turn to specialists who would be available to make the evaluations. And Dr. Julie Rand recommended that we go to a Dr. Adriana Flores and to a Dr. Richard Malloy, M-E-L-O-Y. She recommended that we contact Dr. Flores because Dr. Flores is a licensed psychologist here in Georgia. She specializes in forensic psychology. And from 2001 through 2011, after this case happened, for 10 years, she was employed by the state at the Georgia Regional Hospital. And she was a member of the team that would do evaluations for the state in exactly this type of case. In that 10 years, she rose from being simply a member of that team to being the director of the treatment programming at Georgia Regional Hospital. She's the one that the district attorneys, that the judges turn to and trust in this state. And that's who we went to. Dr. Reed Malloy does not practice here in Georgia. He is in California. She sent us to him and explained to us that he is probably the most well-recognized authority on delusional disorders, dealing with these fractured romantic relationships of probably anybody in the United States. But he doesn't practice here in Georgia. And to bring him from California to study and review 8,000 pages of evidence in the case did not seem a possibility. So we turned, though, to another expert, a Dr. Tracy Marks. We selected her because she is board certified in psychiatry. She is board certified in forensic psychiatry. She is highly experienced in performing these exact types of evaluations in criminal cases and has done that for 10 years here in Georgia. Formerly an assistant professor of psychiatry at Emory School of Medicine. They will testify in this case. Those are 2 of the 3 doctors that have performed an evaluation. Dr. Flores, Dr. Marks will tell you that in their opinion, Hemi is diagnosed as bipolar 1. They will tell you beyond a medical certainty that Hemi suffers from mania and from psychosis, kind of a lack of touch with reality, and that he has a delusional disorder. They will tell you that he thought Sophia and Ian were his children. They will tell you that he thought that Rusty Sneiderman was a danger to them and that he was protecting them from what he had experienced, what his sister had experienced as a child, and that he suffered under that delusional disorder throughout the months that you'll hear testimony about in this case. They both will tell you that Hemi Neuman did not have sufficient mental capacity to distinguish right from wrong in what he did in this case. But there's a third psychiatrist in the case. I told you there's 3. And that's a Dr. Pam Crawford. The district attorney's office located her in South Carolina. They hired her. She evaluated Hemi, and she said Hemi's lying. They call it malingering, is the psychiatric word. And those are the 3 evaluations. I respectfully submit to you that this case is not about what happened. We know what happened. This case is about why. Why could this have ever possibly taken place? I submit to you that the evidence that I have outlined for you, the evidence that will be addressed by the members of our professional community here in Atlanta, in Georgia, the best that there are, will tell you this man is not guilty by reason of insanity. This man should not be released. This man should be confined as the law provides and held as the law provides. This man is not guilty by reason of insanity. The best that we have, the most trusted that we have, will tell you that. And I will respectfully stand before you when this trial is over and ask that based on that evidence, that you would return a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity, so that Hemi will be confined in a state mental institution. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Peters, you can remove these boards at this point in time. All right, ladies and gentlemen, the next phase of the trial will actually be the presentation of evidence. What you have heard this morning was what is called opening statements on what the lawyers anticipate the evidence to show. Now will come the actual presentation of evidence, but before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and give you your, you want to do the stipulations now?
Please.
All right, let's go ahead and do the stipulations now, and then I will give them their instructions for the initial break. You may approach. All right, ladies and gentlemen, both the state and the defense have entered into what is called a stipulation of evidence. And the way we're going to proceed, I'm going to go ahead and allow Mr. Gary to present that at this point in time before the first witness is called. You may proceed, Counselor.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
This is the State of Georgia versus Hemi Neuman, indictment number 11CR1364-5, titled Stipulation for Trial. Comes now the State of Georgia by and through Robert D. James, District Attorney, and Don Geary, and the defendant Hemi Neuman by and through his counsel, Douglas Peters and Robert Rubin, and hereby stipulates to the admissibility of the below listed items without need for a records custodian and without an objection as to relevancy. It is further stipulated that the named participants in the below listed communications are, in fact, the actual participants to those communications. The stipulated items are as follows, and you'll have access to this document. 1, AT&T records for Jan De Silva, it lists his number, from October 2010 to January 2011. For Andrea Sneiderman, it lists her number, from April 2010 to January 2011. For Russell Sneiderman, it lists his number, from April 2010 to November 2010. Hemi Neuman, it lists his number, from April 2010 to January 2011. And cell tower location data for the above listed records. 2, emails for the Gmail account of Hemi Neuman, and it lists the account address. Emails for the Yahoo account of Hemi Neuman, and it lists that address as well. 4, emails from the GE account of Hemi Neuman, and it lists his Gmail account. 5, emails from Yahoo account of Andrea Sneiderman. It lists her Yahoo address. Emails from the GE account of Andrea Sneiderman. It lists her GE account. Chase bank records for the checking account of Hemi Neuman from May 2010 to January 2011. The contents of the hard drive of an iPad retrieved from Hemi Neuman. The contents of the iPhone retrieved from Hemi Neuman. An account history for Northwest Mutual Life Insurance policy for Rusty Sneiderman. And it's signed by the 4 attorneys, Robert James, Don Geary, Douglas Peter, and Robert Rubin, has been accepted by the court. Ladies and gentlemen, these items are presented by the state, and they will be up here in 7 white binders. The first binders are phone records, the second phone records, the third phone records, the fourth phone records. The 5th is the Chase Bank records, the 6th are the emails, and the 7th is emails. In the back of the 7th are the Northwest Mutual Insurance documents. By an agreement with counsel, when we introduce a document that is listed in the stipulations, we will give you the stipulation page number. We may introduce a document as Exhibit X, and when we do, we will also give you the stipulation page number. Did I state that correctly?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Judge, I believe that is the stipulation and agreement between parties as to how it will be addressed. I'll return this to the court.
All right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give you a break at this point in time. Let me give you these instructions. Mr. Deputy, hold my door because I'm going to let the jurors leave the floor before anybody in this room leaves. That way I won't have any problem of anyone interacting with a potential juror who should not interact. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when I give you these instructions, and these are binding throughout the entire trial. When I say do not discuss the case, I allow anyone to discuss the case with you. That's just what it means. Don't talk about the case. Don't let anyone discuss the case with you. If you do decide to have lunch here in downtown Decatur, you're more than welcome. Obviously, there are a lot of people in this room, and there are people who may or may not want to talk with you. But do not talk. They don't want to allow anyone to talk with you. As I indicated, either A, you got to move away from them or tell them to move away from you, but don't discuss anything with anyone about this case. Once I release you, do not remain upon the floor because I actually want you to leave the building, and when you return, just come directly back into the jury room, but do not let anyone talk to you or interact with you about this case. I don't want you to hear anything you should not hear. Do not read or look at any media coverage pertaining to this case. Do not go on the internet and do any independent investigation about this case. Do not let anyone see you in an email communication about this case or communicate with you in any way. Do not go to any location that may or may not have been discussed during the course of this process. You're more than welcome to bring something to snack on if you want to in the afternoon. You can have something to drink in the jury box, but you cannot eat in the jury box. As I indicated earlier, while you go to lunch, you cannot consume any alcoholic beverages during the lunchtime. Deputy Moore will turn back over to you your cell phones, but my preference is for you to leave them in the car. But you will not be able to have cell phones, laptops, pages, or any type of communication device during the jury room with you, and he will give those items back to you. And also he will collect those up to you after lunch. As I indicate, the lawyers and the parties and the witnesses, potential witnesses, cannot talk or interact with you outside of this courtroom. And I don't ever want you to think they're being rude or drawing the inferences from that one way or the other. Now, I'm going to release you, and you have the parking code, and unless you go in and out of the parking deck, if you don't have it, I will make sure you have that. My staff will give that to you if you don't have it yet, and make sure. It'll be posted on in the jury room when you get back if you don't have it yet. But you're going to get that, so you can come and go throughout the weeks. Now, I'm going to release you until 1:30. Now, that's the time in which I want you to physically be back in the jury room. That gives you enough time to leave the parking garage, go get something to eat, come back or run errands, whatever you want to do. Now, like I said, you're not being sequestered, so it's always on the honor system. Do not let anyone talk to you. Continue to wear your badges. Do not grant any interviews. Do not seek any interviews or anything of that nature. As I said, I know the media is covering this, but they're not videotaping or recording your images or your faces. If you think someone's taking your picture, you got to let me know. That's the only way I can do anything about it. But technically, they're not going to be doing that. All right? All right, hearing that, follow the instructions of Deputy Moore. I will see you back at 1:30. Take your notepads with you, leave them in the jury room, turn them face down, and actually after the first witness will be called after lunch, and that's when the presentation of evidence with the stipulation. All right? Just leave them face down. We'll see you back at 1:30. Everyone else remain. Where's my deputy? All right, we're going to recess at 1:30.
All right.